Hi, it's time for the next instalment of the Mebes Tarot Majors Course, which is the 8th Arcanum, Justice. And here is the colour version of the card. The pathway from Chesed to Hokmah, mercy to wisdom. And there's a reading, a quote here from Levi at the start of the Arcanum. The science of life is written in the book of nature, but man alone can read it. The Hebrew letter corresponding to Arcanum 8 is Cheth, whose numerical value is 8. The astrological correspondence is the zodiacal sign of Cancer. The hieroglyph from this Arcanum is a field, symbolising all which can be subjected to cultivation. And it is the passive region to which the activity of the victor of Arcanum 7, the Chariot, should be directed. The card of Arcanum 8 has, at the bottom, 2 columns between them, and further on, a seated feminine figure, who is associated here with Themis. The forehead of the figure is girded with a ribbon of gold, the eyes are blindfolded. On her chest, attached to a chain, there is a solar cross. In her left hand, Themis holds a scale, in her right hand a sword. It is assumed that the figure is sitting on a cubic stone, although the folds of her garment cover and conceal it. We will try to interpret this picture. The figure is female. The Arcanum therefore represents something already existing, already materialized. On the card we see the binary 3 times, always balanced by a third element. The first binary, the columns, such as those of Arcanum 2, neutralized by Themis sitting in the middle. The interpretation of this binary is somewhat different from that of Arcanum 2, the High Priestess. It would succinctly be the following: Seeing Yakim and Boaz. Seeing Yakim and there being Themis in the middle, we can deduce that on the other side is Boaz. In other words, if we perceive what is symbolically called by us one of the 2 forces that compose the pair and recognise the existence of an astral vortex, whose system includes the force that we see, then we must also recognise the existence of a second force that complements the first pairs, and therefore equals to it, parallel to it, but directed in the opposite direction. If we are aware that we have an imagination depicting images in the present for us, and at the same time imagine some clichés as past ones, then we should know about the possibility of presenting other clichés in the future. If we believe in the higher androgynous manifestation of the divine, and see in any emanations its characteristic feature of activity, expansiveness, that which knows, then we must be convinced of the existence of other emanations of a passive, attractive nature that coincide with the field of what to know can. If there is justice, and there is the possibility of spiritual harmony, then probably there is mercy. And here he is classifying justice as negative, spiritual harmony as neutral, and mercy as positive. If there is an idea of an ascent, and if the idea of a level, neutral, is allowed, then there must be an idea of a descent. These formulas explain the title of the Arcanum 8 in the plane of the archetype, Liberatio, that is, the law of the equilibrium of the great metaphysical scale, in which one of the dishes, the dishes of the scale, is charged with the positive value of the great Arcanum, and the other with a negative value. The pointer symbolises the androgynous apex of the ascending triangle. Yeah, you can just about scale at the top. The sword in the hand of Themis explains to us the arcanum in the human field of the theosophical ternary. The sword reminds us that there is the law of Themis, even when conditioned by the times, places, and environments, and that the transgression of this, lex, will bring a punishment due to the action of the equilibrium principle. The word lex is the name given to conditional rules which are evolutionary within time and space, but inevitable at every given moment. Thus, lex will be the second title of the Arcanum. In the other hand, Themis holds a balance, another binary, with its neutralizing element being the pointer. Let us bring this symbol to the field of nature. If someone breaks the balance of balance, it will necessarily provoke a reaction aimed at restoring equilibrium. If someone put a 5 kilogram weight on the left plate, you should, in order to balance the scale, load to the right plate with another 5 kilos. If someone stained his karma by a process inconsistent with the laws of equilibrium in the individual accounts within the chain of their incarnation, then she or he will have to erase this stain and restore balance when he or she repeatedly stumbles upon the page which has been stained. The third name of the Arcanum will therefore be Karma. The card itself is called Themis or Justice. Let us turn to the evaluation of arithmetic deconstruction of the Arcanum. Let's start with the 2-digit deconstructions. 8 equals 1 plus 7. The 1, or the first Arcanum, represents the conscious manifestations and the application of the balanced androgynous principles, the first Arcanum being the Magician. The 7th Arcanum is that of victory. Therefore, 1 plus 7 means the application of victory. In fact, the first duty, the first concern of the victor, should consist in establishing the order, justice, and legality on the ground conquered. Justice is the wife of victory. Arcanum 8 is the wife of Arcanum 7. But where does the magician apply the fruit of mental victory? Naturally, on the astral plane, during the astral performance. Here you must remember the law of liberatio, into account the opposing mood of influences. We have decided, for example, to suggest to a patient a certain action. With this, the momentum given is mental. However, if we ourselves ardently desire that the patient performs what is suggested, that is, if we are astrally interested in this, we create a hindrance to the formation of the second indispensable force to provoke a whirlwind, which should serve as an instrument for the suggestion. A whirlwind. In addition to this second force, other volitional flows may join, complicating and forcing us to reinforce our suggestion. For all this to be avoided, counterbalance our desire with an absence of desire equivalent in strength. And it is indispensable to convince us that the realization of the suggestion is indifferent to us, while at the same time remaining mentally convinced that it should take place. So in fact, the suggestion will be made in an impressive way. In general, we better achieve what our personal animistic interests do not interfere with. It is the reason for which we get more easily to something other than ourselves. The same rules apply to punishment. In order for someone to punish fairly and promptly, they must be imbued with mercy. In general, an ignorant and weak being throws himself into the fight when emotionally involved, thus diminishing their chances of winning. A strong being is controlled, knows how to wait and choose the fight, choose the most memorable, favourable moment for the fight. Since we speak of justice, it is natural to know to what extent and in what way an occultist can allow himself to punish his fellow man. The astral cliché of punishment is formed automatically and according to Arcanum 8, therefore, can only be a mental evaluation of the offence of his fellow man. This will form the axis of a whirlwind. The rest will fit the astral. However, we should not forget that the law of karma, the negative pole of Fabre-Dolivet's triangle, was established once and for all and will act even without any participation on our part. Therefore, an enlightened occultist knows that he has a right to a mental censorship of the actions of his fellow man only to the extent that he himself participates in the work of the emanations of the primordial principle. In other words, only a theurgist has the right to censor, and even so, only to the extent that he really is a theurgist. Theurgy, even of a temporary nature, requires a very clear worldview and a great internal purity. Therefore, it is rare that participation in a punishment is in accordance with the law. Magical punishments allowed by Christian Illuminism for their adherents are collectively called reprobatio, literally condemnation. There are 3 degrees of reprobations: disapproval, sorrow for the act of one's neighbour, and censure. Disapproval is formulated as follows: although you are my brother, I would not want to share with you the clichés of your actions. We are not together. Christ allowed this degree of punishment to his disciples in the most extreme cases. Its symbolic formula is, shake off the dust from our feet. Christ himself, in rare cases, applied the 2nd degree, the degree of sorrow for the act of one's neighbour. It would have been better if this man had not been born. The 3rd degree, rebuke, impresses with the violence and inexorability of its consequences. The cases of the application of the latter can be seen in the story of Moses, who widely used theurgical methods. It will not be too much to remember the episodes of Kor, Dathan and Abiram, Numbers 16. In closer times, we can quote the famous censure made by the Grand Master of the Templar Order, Jacobus Burgundus Malay, from the flame of a fire at the address of Pope Clement V and King Philip the Beautiful, who destroyed him, calling them to the court of God, the first no later than 50 days, and the second no later than a year. Both predictions of death came true even before the time specified. From all that has been said, the danger of the punishment that we have called the curse follows. The degree of strength is not always the same if, say, a father curses his son. Then he often relies only on his authority, i.e. the authority of the 4th Arcanum, the Emperor, without any further arcana. But the right of reprobation, as related to the 8th Arcanum, undoubtedly requires passing through to the 6th and the 7th by the operator, that is, the prior internal realization of the hermetic victory. Another decomposition of the 8 into the terms 8 equals 7 plus 1. 1 provides the audience themselves to analyze how the superiority of personal victory over the manifestation of balanced will, i.e. as a conscious and voluntary inertness of the victor. I pass the decomposition 8 equals 2 plus 6. 2 equals gnosis, equals knowledge. 6, the law of reactions in the world. Therefore, in general, the work of an enlightened operator in the field of static and dynamic binaries. But how does the law of reaction expand the world outlook of a learned operator? It will inspire him with caution, warning him of the existence of return strikes. Imagine someone operating magically, that is, creating and directing an astral whirlwind to a person for a particular purpose. Gosh, my neighbour's being noisy. The scheme of this magic operation is as follows. A whirlwind is created by the operator in the most efficient way possible and directed to a specific person. Reaching its target, the whirlwind causes a physical manifestation whose cliché will join the operator's karma in the positive or negative direction. Sometimes, though, the whirlwind, despite its existence, has no effect. This can happen in 3 cases. 1. When the patient consciously protected himself from the attack by concentrating on generating the astral counter vortex with the lowest subplane, equivalent to the subplane of the approaching vortex, or even more compact. This is a so-called active reflection of the attack. 2. When the patient at the moment of energetic contact with the vortex was shielded from the action by conscious and powerful concentration on another subject of realization, which is part of a cycle of a more powerful project, better than the attack plan than the plan of attack. For example, when the patient whom you are involving to death is busy with a grandiose plan of creating or destroying collectivities, in comparison with which personal hatred is something very small, insignificant in all astral subplanes. 3. When, at the moment of contact with the attacking vortex, the most active part of the patient's pentagram is floating in subplanes much higher than the most active regions of the vortex. For example, you want to ruin a person who lives, as they say, outside the sphere of material interests, or wish failure in the service of a person exclusively immersed in scientific aspirations and neglecting all the elements of careerism, or send larvae of hatred to a person praying for his enemies, etc. I don't recommend that. In all 3 cases, the whirlwind will not hit the target person. However, the formation of this whirlwind will have entailed a certain, though limited, imbalance in the astral world, and the equilibrium will have to be re-established again by creating a corresponding cliché. If the astral aggression has failed to reach the person to whom it was destined, it will inevitably affect another entity whose astrozone resembles more the essence of the created astral swirl. It's the law of correspondence. One such entity first will be the operator himself, since he used his own fluids in the formation of the whirlwind. Thus he will receive what is called in magic the return stroke. So don't do black magic, basically, because it's going to rebound back on you. Let us suppose you magically tried to inspire love. The whirlwind reflected, and you yourself fell in love. You have been spoiling, you failed, and you yourself fell. To avoid these bad consequences, representatives of black magic always insure themselves against return blows by choosing a second dummy patient, directing the whirlwind for 2, but including the first patient in a more prominent way in the ceremony of magic operation. For example, they direct the disease at you with a turn in case of failure, at a familiar horse or dog, or at some very passive person who cannot be expected to repulse the blow. Again, definitely don't recommend doing any of this. The inverse deconstruction, that is, 8 equals 6 plus 2, corresponds to the case in which knowledge, 2, is subordinate to the choice of path, 6. In other words, it is the awareness of the danger that knowledge can be put both in service of evolution as well as involution. Let us pass to the deconstruction 8 equals 3 plus 5. Here, metaphysics, that is, the high world of the Ternaries, 3, is introduced into daily life and dominates the field of the impulses of the personal will, 5. We can ask ourselves how metaphysics is introduced into life. Transforming mature ideas into forms and, by analogy, realizing the concrete plane as mature forms. A man who desires to be called righteous, 8, and has broadly constructed his conception of the world, has no right not to elaborate it in an ordered philosophical system. If he does not, it will create damaging mental strain. And in exactly the same way, it would be embarrassing, having drawn up a plan of grandiose, well-adapted building or mechanism, not to make attempts to implement it. The same deconstruction can greatly confuse the so-called supporters of Platonic love, thinking of confining themselves to astral manifestations of the mental field and forgetting that they have come true for nothing and, moreover, are obliged not to shy away from the consequences of existence in the third physical plane. After all, this plane provides a reference point for the astral process of purification of karma. If, on the physical plane, a human being meets the temptation of two roads, it is not for them to remain undecided, postponing the choice for a future incarnation, but rather to choose consciously and decisively the right way. We can say that these people, having pronounced Yod, and after that Hey, are afraid to pronounce the vowel so as not to see the second Hey, the beauty of which they fear. The conduct of such persons is typically indecisive and cowardly when there are some divergences of opinion in parties or groups. If we offer something our sympathy, this should be offered in all three planes. If we hate it, then it is preferable to hate on all three planes. Be wholehearted. People who on the mental plane have a determined conviction, and on the astral plane the well-formed cliché of this conviction, and nevertheless maintain the neutrality on the physical plane, are called by Christ warm, to differentiate themselves from the hot and cold. There can easily be a mutual inversion of a hot and a cold, but nothing can be done with a being always amorphous, always fearful, and lukewarm. This was well understood by the Masons of the last 3 centuries. Upon initiation into the 30th Scottish degree, the highest of Hermetic degrees, the future Chevalier Kadosh, before taking the oath, was called to simulate the murder of the traitor Freemasonry in order to test how much he hates his enemies. The initiation candidate did not know what was striking in the heart of a ram with its side shaved cleanly, and sincerely imagined himself to be the executor of Areopagus' orders to punish the traitor's brother. The simulation of murder under these conditions, of course, stained the collective karma of the Masonic chain and overshadowed the Igor. This inconvenience was put up for the sake of urgent recognition of the hot from the warm. The opposite of deconstruction, 8 = 5 + 3, can be well illustrated by the way of proceeding of the people who adapt their logic and their metaphysics to personal manifestations. I like him, therefore he served this or that. This is a reasoning of a man of type 8 = 5 + 3, and other comments are unnecessary. It's raining. Let's go to deconstruction 8 = 4 + 4. 4 + 4. The most typical of the Arcanum we are studying, the most typical, 8 = 4 + 4. 4 opposes 4, that is, form to form, authority to authority, adaptation to adaptation. Offending someone, a form, will have to apologize. A revolutionary government, an authority, was created. A dictatorship opposes it, another authority. Someone prepared a ruse to circumvent or breach the law, an adaptation. The police will act in an appropriate way to the culprit, another adaptation. It is a general formula of karma and also of relative human justice. The contrast of forms prevails in magic. The contrast of authorities in politics. and the opposition of adaptations, supply and demand, in the economic field. Having finished the arithmetic survey of the Arcanum, we turn to its most popular pentacles. There are two of them. The first is called the Wheel of Ezekiel, or the Wheel of Pythagoras, depending on the kind of symbolic styles. The second is known as the Pentacle of Realization. The Wheel of Ezekiel in the interpretation of the Rosicrucian schools is featured in figure 31. The Wheel of Ezekiel, as it is used in the Rosicrucian schools, figure 31, sorry, that was a repetition. The solid cross gives the tetragrammaton quaternary scheme, that is, one of the cycle's dynamics. The cross of dotted lines, or the INRI quaternary, represents the anagram of one of the three following propositions: Igne natura renovatur integra, Husus Nazarenus Rex Judeorum, or in nobis regnat Jesus. We have already found the first proposition, which clarifies the role of fire as a purifying element, purifying and renewing element, indicating the means of moving the wheel and passing from one cycle to another in the creative processes. The second proposition points out the importance of Christ's redemptive sacrifice in the evolution of the wheel. The third proposition, the motto of the first Rosicrucians, literally translates as "In Jesus we reign," and of course should not be understood in the sense of proud isolation of the initiated in relation to the profane, but as an indication of the duty of each to seek the Christ within his heart, and, through this search, to move the quaternary of the elements in the evolutionary direction. The circular inscription rota indicates the direction of rotator of the tetragrammaton quaternary, from R to O, i.e., so that Yod goes into the second He, in other words, in the direction of seeking causation. The figure is presented in the form of beams from 8 straight lines and suggests the idea of a spinning wheel within another wheel. And then he directs us to see Ezekiel chapter 1 and 10. It says the colour of the wheel is like unto topaz colour. The Wheel of Pythagoras, figure 32, differs from the previous one by the following. Quite pale those. 1. In place of the letters of the tetragrammaton and INRI are 5 pointed stars. 2. There is no indication of the direction of movement. 3. Within the wheel are complementary signs that symbolize the 7 secondary causes, the planets, as well as 2 Greek letters, Alpha and Omega, the meaning of which is identical to that of lingam, that is, the fertilization of the passive principle by the active. The figure formed by the intersection of solid lines in the centre of the physical plane, which presents itself as a small island surrounded by the waters of the astral in a circle, which, in turn, are insignificant compared to the immensity of the mental outer circle. A more concrete analysis of this pentacle will lead us to the field of astronomy. The outer circle would symbolize the stellar universe, the inner circle our solar system, and the beam's central continuum, the elemental life on our little planet. That's my emails. The Pentacle of Realization, the next figure, appears like this. Background is black, the lower astral. The outer square is silver and represents a frame already prepared beforehand, passively, inside which something should be done. The inner square is golden, active led to achievement. Letters that 8 times repeats the great name, the Tetragrammaton, must be of the colour of fire, because they correspond to the assertion Igne natura renovatura integra. Through fire nature is reborn whole. This pentacle is used when there is need to concentrate on the realization of a project or task, of an association, or even of a more abstract subject, but always of relevant importance. The force generated by the 8-fold repetition of the Tetragrammaton will be analysed in Arcanum 10. So that's the end of the Mebes course on the 8th Arcanum, and there are some notes here. This being the 8th Arcanum, we are moved to remark upon the sacred qualities associated with the number 8 in both Eastern and Western mystery traditions. In the Pythagorean Tarot of John Opsipas, which we found particularly useful for learning the numerical meanings of the minor arcana, the 8s appear as gateways separating the lower levels from the upper degrees of attainment represented by 9 and especially 10. In this system it is taught that the 4 8th gates are barred by rivalry, wands, memory, swords, delusion, cups, and inertia, coins. And herein we may see a form of justice. One cannot pass the threshold of the upper levels without the proper attainments and degree of mastery learned from the preceding arcana. In Meditations on the Tarot, we are told that the Arcanum of Justice shows us how to maintain our inner equilibrium, as indicated by the balance held by the woman of the image. We are also reminded of the first commandment, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me," from Exodus 23, which indicates that we are not to substitute an intellectual abstraction of God for the spiritual reality of God. We are reminded that in order to judge properly and fairly, we must be conscious of the extent of our own knowledge and ignorance relative to the matter at hand. As we cannot know the soul of another, one human judgment does not impress upon the souls of others. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. It is also natural for us to consider the Tree of Life in the context of this card, where justice holds the balance between the dual pillars of mercy and severity, and ensures that karma is overcome by the justice of grace.